Good morning. Today we're going to talk about sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are formed from bits of sediment cemented together. That's normally the way we think about sedimentary rocks. And the process of sedimentary rock formation is referred to as lithification. That big word stems from the term lithify, which means rock. And it includes the processes of compaction and cementation. Because if sedimentary rocks are made from bits of sediments cemented together, you would have those bits of sediment that have to be compacted, and something has to hold them together so that they can eventually become rocks. And so that's why we say that lithification includes compaction and cementation. There are three different cementing agents. One of them is iron oxide. Iron oxide has a reddish brown appearance because it's rust. So if you have sedimentary rocks whose cementing agent is iron oxide, then you would expect them to have a reddish brown appearance. Calcite, the mineral that we've talked about that can be identified if we put dilute hydrochloric acid on it, is also one of the cementing agents. And then the third one is silica. Some features of sedimentary rocks, things that you will find in sedimentary rocks that you would not find in other type rocks, would be one of them, they contain fossils. Now, if you think back to igneous rocks that we talked about previously, igneous rocks are formed from hot, melted rock material. And this melted material, which can be called lava or magma, even if there were remains of organisms left behind, they would be destroyed. So you wouldn't expect to find fossils, the remains of prehistoric life, embedded in rocks found in igneous rocks. Also, sedimentary rocks are deposited in layers or strata. You may see within chapter 3 of your textbook where it talks about sedimentary rock beds, or it might talk about sedimentary rock strata. It's the same thing as when you hear me talk about the layers. There's also ripple marks that can be preserved in these rocks, and they can indicate a beach or a stream channel. And at the beach, I'm sure that you've probably seen ripple marks in the sand. Sedimentary rocks are also important. Geologists can use them to get clues to the past environment, and they have economic importance too. We use coal, that's an example of a fossil fuel, petroleum and natural gases that can be found in the pores of some sedimentary rocks. Now, there are three basic types of sedimentary rocks. One type is called clastic, and clastic sedimentary rocks are made from sediments. They could be made of sediment cemented together like gravel, sand, silt, mud. Here's some examples. If we have rocks that are sedimentary that have rounded gravel-sized particles, we say that the rock is a conglomerate. But if the gravel sizes of the particles are angular, the rock is a breccia. And here are the examples. See, on your left, we have rounded gravel-sized particles. That's a conglomerate. Here, they're angular-sized particles. And so that wouldn't be an example of a conglomerate. And then we have rocks that are made of sand-sized particles. Within your textbook, you probably saw a chart that had the names of the sediments and how large the sediments are, because we classify the sediments according to size. But we're not going to go around trying to memorize what the size of the sediment would have to be so that it can become sand. We'll refer to that chart to help us if we need to. And here's sandstone. Sandstone, then, is the sedimentary rock that is made when particles of sand are cemented together. And then if we have the rock that's composed of fine-grained rocks, and that would be silt-sized particles, which would be smaller than sand. Also, It may also have clay-sized particles in the same rock. And so if it has silt-sized particles and clay-sized particles that have been cemented together, we refer to that sedimentary rock as siltstone. And here's an example of siltstone. And looking at it carefully, you should be able to see that the particles that make up the siltstone are smaller than the particles that made up the sandstone in the previous slide. And then that we're getting smaller with the particles. Shale is typically composed of clay minerals. And also, if we call something a shale, it has the ability to split into thin layers, these small particles, and also the ability to split into thin layers. We take a look at shale, and I put 3 different examples, different colors, and see the thin layers that could be here. All right, and I moved ahead too fast. The other group of sedimentary rocks would be those that are chemical, and they are formed where dissolved particles precipitate from solution. And examples would be rock salt. When we were on minerals, we talked about halite, which is the mineral that would make up the rock salt. And then limestone. Limestone happens to be a sedimentary rock that is made up of calcite. Every limestone is not a chemical limestone. Some limestone would be formed from the remains of organic material, and you're going to see an example in the coming up slides. All right, if it's organic and it's a sedimentary rock, it is formed from the accumulation of plant or animal debris. Chalk is an example of one because chalk happens to be made up of the microscopic shells of organisms. Then there's coal. And here's an example of another type limestone. It's referred to as coquina. When you can see this one, it really would be organic because look at the shells that are all cemented together. First limestone that you saw was chemical. You didn't see any shells at all. So we couldn't put it into the group and call it organic. However, calcite is the basic building material anyway, because calcite happens to make up those shells. This table occurs in your textbook within chapter 3, a table similar to this, where it lists the rocks in order, starting with those that are made up of large particles, like gravel-sized particles, until we get down to mud. For example, when we talked about the larger particles, if the large particles of gravel around it, we call that sedimentary rock that is formed, we refer to that one as conglomerate. If we get smaller, so that the sizes become 1/16 to 2 millimeters, we say that the sediment is sand and the rock is sandstone. You see, we're getting smaller in size, siltstone, until finally we get to shale. The chemical sedimentary rocks, we talked about those. Most of those have their composition for a lot of them would be calcite. And we talked about the regular limestone I showed you a picture of, and then we have biochemical limestone or the organic limestone, like chalk, for a typical example, and also coquina. Those are examples. So now we have moved from talking about igneous rocks in our previous lecture to sedimentary rocks in this lecture, and we know that we can classify sedimentary rocks according to 3 groups. One group would be clastic, which were made of sediment cemented together, and we also know the names of some of the sediments. We know that it could be calcite, it could be silica, or iron oxide, and we know that the process of sedimentary rock formation is called lithification, and the lithification includes compaction and cementation. Now this ends our lecture on sedimentary rocks. Have a good day.